Hey, welcome everybody to the latest installment of MSP Business School. As always, I'm Brian Doyle and I'm here with you as your host. I'm really excited about today's session. No offense to my vendor friends, but it's always fun when I get MSPs to participate on MSP Business School and share their stories. Obviously, with many of our listeners being in the MSP seat, it's always great to learn from others that came before you, right? So I'm excited to bring on our guest now. With me today, I've got Jim Houghton. Welcome, Jim, from JCMR. I've gotten to know Jim a little bit over the past 6 or 8 weeks, I guess, Jim, or maybe a little bit longer at this point. And, you've got a fun little backstory. You've got a wealth of knowledge. So I appreciate you coming on board to join me today.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's great to be here. And I think that I've collected a lot of life experiences, let's just put it that, along with the gray hair.
I was going to say, those of us with gray hair, we'd like to say that it was these amazing things we encountered. It just means we were around for a long time.
It's that old, the older you get, the more you realize you don't know.
There's a big part of that too. I always say that to junior engineers that I used to have on my team when they'd be like, "Oh man, I know that. I know everything." I'm like, you will come to realize how little you do know and how big this little world is. So, take heed in that. But it's always fun to, when you recognize that, I think it makes life a lot easier, does it not?
It does. It certainly makes you a little bit more humble and better able to listen.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Well, I love to kick things off with first learning about our guests. So, if you wouldn't mind, Jim, tell us a little bit about your journey in IT and what got you into the crazy world of MSP.
Let's see. Without going too far off the rails here, I'd say that in high school, I thought I was going to design airplanes. I thought I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, and it didn't even take more than a semester in school at the Air Force Academy to make me realize that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I got very interested in the technology angle of it. And I think what appealed to me most about it, especially at the ripe old age of whatever I was, 18, 19, 20, was the fact that it changes so rapidly. There was no old timers that could, tell me, "Hey kid, that's not the way you do it," because it changed every 6 months. So that was kind of fun. It is what I focused on in school. And that's really been a lot of my career has been following things that I was curious about and getting good at it and sort of learning lessons on the way. So at the moment, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of JCMR, which is, as you mentioned, is a MSP. But I've been in the IT industry for 34 years now. I've done literally everything from climbing telephone poles and pulling cables in data centers to architecting global networks to advising corporate boards on transformation initiatives. So I've kind of run the gamut. No particular focus in industries, although I've definitely spent more time in technology and financial services organizations, just kind of the way things evolved. Most of my experience has been with Fortune 500 firms. As I was thinking about this webcast, I've probably worked for either as an employer in the consulting capacity for half of the Fortune 100, I would say. But I've also started a couple of companies and sold them. Both successfully sold, one not so successful financially, but those are learning opportunities. I've also been a chief technology officer a couple of times. I've been a general manager. My last role before I decided to get out of the big corporate company experience and join JCMR was as the global head for Cognizant's digital consulting business. So I've sort of vacillated back and forth in my career between being the business guy, being the technologist, but at the core, I have to say I really am a technologist. I love it. It's always been interesting to me trying to figure out how things work. But one thing that's always been important to me is sort of the why or the so what. Okay, that's really cool. So what? What are you going to do about it? And I think that's one of the things that's really served me well. It's always been fun to me. I mean, the most fun that you can have in business as a technology guy like me is using some of the new technology advancements and figure out how to exploit them early to really drive disruptive business change, which again, at this point in time, there's probably been 4 or 5 big cycles that I've lived through over the years, and they all sort of follow the same trend, the same the same devolution. I'm going to say, I'm not going to say they definitely go through peaks and troughs there. But the fun part is really say, okay, if we did this, what could it do? All right, what does this mean to an insurance company? What does this mean to a manufacturer, whatever? And then figuring out how to apply what's essentially under the covers the same technology in very, very different ways for business advantage. So that's sort of the fun thing that's kept me going for all these years.
So let's unpack a couple of things that you shared during that introduction of yourself. First one is, we've had this conversation a couple times offline about, the joy of working in the corporate world. Maybe if you can share with the MSP community, because many have not had the joy of working in the corporate side of the ledger. What are some of the biggest changes that you felt when you came into the MSP space versus the corporate space?
Oh boy. So sales cycles can and should be a lot shorter. That's probably the most obvious thing that hits you in the nose. And for those of you that have spent more of your time in the smaller market space and aspire to sell into those spaces, I would advise you to make sure you have enough zeros in your bank account before you waste a lot of time and money for something that may you could win a contract. Unfortunately, I've seen this at some of the companies that I've worked for. A 2-year bid process, they'll award a contract, and 3 years later, nothing happens. They just basically let the thing fade away. So the amount of unnecessary, I'll just say unnecessary waste. Sometimes it's processes, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's just things that don't make sense, but people do because that's what I said earlier, because that's the way it's always been done. Those are the sort of things that really grate on my nerves. And you have to deal with that when you're working in very large organizations, even the biggest, most nimble tech companies that we could think of. They too have some of those quirks, shall I say, that make them run a little bit less efficiently than they could. It does make you really good at eventually learning which things you're just ramming your head into a wall versus things you can actually change. So after a few years of perspective, you start to understand, okay, that's just a waste of time. Don't waste energy being angry. Go focus over here and do something that makes a difference.
Yep, and that is fact. And if MSPs didn't take heed to anything that Jim just said there, the biggest one is make sure you got those zeros in the bank account before you decide you want to chase mid-market or upper market. I had the privilege of working within an MSP environment as well that catered to mid to enterprise accounts, and everything you said was so true. We could spend a year just getting through legalese on contracts, and then another 6 to 8 months before you would even kick off a contract. And I'm sure, I fortunately never had the experience of having the contract fade away, but I've certainly heard it. And, these things are reality. Yes, there's huge rewards and huge upside when you get there. But if you're not managing, mine for minnows while you're chasing whales is what I always said. You got to make sure that you've got the day-to-day covered before you start hunting big game. So
I would actually, if you're just trying to do this for the first time, don't, unless you have a very close personal friend that works in that organization that can be your shepherd.
You do have to have an angle in. There's no doubt about it. And if you don't have that angle in, you're probably chasing ghosts.
Yes, you are. You're probably just somebody's RFP fodder to follow a process and get a check mark.
Now, another thing you talked a little bit about was, the evolution of technology, right? And I think one of the biggest things that, I see often that MSPs can fall into the trap of is the shiny toy syndrome, right? Obviously, for example, AI is one of the biggest conversations on our table right now. And, but the question is, how do you harness AI and bring it to a business process? And, one of the things I keyed into when you were talking there was the fact that part of your job is kind of understanding these new technologies and seeing how they can be business process disruptors. And I think that's a very key word there. It's not just technology for technology's sake. How can you disrupt an existing business process? Maybe you can share a little bit about kind of how you approach that.
Sure. I also alluded to the fact that these all follow similar patterns, similar cycles. And I think the place where I start with AI is the same place that I had to start with digital, and the same place where I had to start with cloud and a few other things. As tactfully as you can, get the person that you're talking to So when you say cloud, when you say AI, what do you mean? What do you think of? Because again, if I'm being generous, AI is a very, very broad spectrum. I personally don't believe that. There's some things that are really actually AI, and then there's a whole lot of things that are let's call it machine learning and other high performance computing things that have been around for a very, very long time, or business process automation. What I have found helpful is trying to get that grounding so that you know the frame of reference of the person that you're talking to. And then you can start to make progress on, let's say you're talking to a CFO. There are very good business process automation opportunities, which could be tweaked with some very, I'll say, lightweight AI capabilities. But the first thing you have to do is actually get some automation in there. So think about the back office of accounts receivable, accounts payable, and all those sorts of things. That's a perfect example of a very routine process that's been done for a long time, and in most organizations has not been optimized for a very long time. So define the process, understand what's end to end, then think about applying technology, and don't automate a bad process. Automating a bad process just makes bad things happen faster, which is and the same when we did automated server provisioning and things like that 20 years ago. Like, okay, think about what you actually want to accomplish and focus on the outcome. Black box that, if you will. If you're an engineer, then and you don't understand the concept of black boxing, that's really the easiest way to do it. What's the gazinta? What's the gozada? In between, the rest is the technology magic, and you can call it AI, call it whatever makes your customer happy, but don't get lost in the buzzwords, because that doesn't help anybody.
I agree with you. I think most AI that you're hearing is a combination of automation business, automation and some of the robotic, provisioning, as well as much as it is the AI capabilities when you really look at what the output is. And I think something we also got to take into consideration is look at your audience too. Before you go too far over their head with some of this, get an understanding of what they know about the subject as well. I was just having a conversation this morning with my wife, who just happens to be a teacher, but again, a lot of MSPs I work within school systems.
Mhm.
And there are still people that are roaming around her school. She showed one of her fellow teachers what ChatGPT was yesterday, and this woman thought she just found, gold. And it's been around for a while, right? But you got to really get in the head of the person sitting across the desk for you and go, what are they really trying to accomplish? Where is AI going to help them, or where is a new business process going to help them that can be automated? And try to understand that first, and then slot the technology in behind it.
Yeah, that's great. If you don't mind, I'll add a corollary to
No,
that.
please
I've
go
seen
for
this
it.
happen more time, including in some very senior people in some very large organizations. Um, Trying to be the smartest guy in the room is make your ego feel good for 3 seconds, but it's completely useless in the context of what we're just talking about.
Yep.
You should always try to be a teacher to somebody. You don't have to forget the last word, and you don't have to go 7 miles above the person's head so they think, wow, that person is really smart. The real value, great, you're going to get pegged as smart. You're not going to get any business because you made them feel like an idiot.
Yeah. And I think we've both had the experience too, to realize that most senior leaders will tell you that they tend to be the dumbest person in the room, right? Because they're really focused on what they know in the section that they're responsible for. And then they rely on their lieutenants to really help them gather the information that they need to know at the top. And that was something that became very apparent to me with, within some of the business reviews I was doing at a Fortune 1000 with, the senior most leaders. They're like, no, we have you guys to tell us what's going on. We just need to know what's going to be broken, what's going to be potentially, a vulnerability for us as an organization, and what are we going to save, right?
Yeah, I'm only smiling though, but don't take advantage of that, because there's always a couple of hidden
Oh yeah,
business executives. I'd be one of them that loves to play like I don't know anything about this, and wait for somebody to go a little bit down the tracks and okay, you don't know your ass from your elbow, and forgive my language, and do that. I've met more than a few CEO friends of mine that are trained engineers, and they're very smart folks. So don't don't assume they don't know.
No, not assuming, but if you look at them, they again, we talked about it earlier. Some of them have huge egos, but a lot of humility at the same time, and it's kind of amazing when you see that combination, which is probably also what gets them to lead very large organizations like that. They know when they get into that role, their job tends to change a little bit, and even the CIOs know their job changes a little bit at that stage too. But putting that aside, when you get down to the small to mid market, the reality is it's the same conversation. You don't want to make your person sitting across the table feel silly, feel undermined, feel like they're less than, right? In one of those sales conversations, it's not going to bode well for you. So you've got to really dig into what are they trying to accomplish. And by doing that, then you can foster your conversation and kind of frame it to support that need. But yeah, there's all kinds out there, Jim. That's our reality, right?
Yeah, but I mean, that's sometimes that's the best thing you can do is, okay, let's talk. All right, you want to do this? Let's make it a 5-step process to get there, because you're so far away from that right now. If we tried to do that, we'd spend a year and you probably wouldn't get anything value out of it, and you'd lose a lot of money and blah, 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 blah. Instead, let's do this. And then next we'll do this. And then next we'll do this. And at some point in time, you'll get there.
And if you do it right, you can have a lot of fun with it too. There is something about understanding the behavior and kind of what makes people tick that really makes the sales cycle a little bit more fun, especially when we talk about, IT, where the gift just keeps on giving, right? We have the opportunity to make one sale, but then many others with our clients. So understanding, kind of how they operate, the logistics, the politics within is definitely something that can be fun and certainly to your benefit if you can master it as you grow throughout your career.
That was certainly a learning for me later in my career, because especially early in the career doing consulting work, I'm like super technical. No, this is great.
Yeah.
What are these ridiculous org change people doing over here? What are they, just a waste of time? Why are we spending all that money on that? But over the years, I'm like, well, that's actually really important, because you can build the best system in the world, but if people don't use it, it's kind of worthless.
See, in my role, I've been listening to no since I was in my early 20s. So you realize that you got to understand all these people because they are there for a reason, even if you don't feel the reason's valid in your own opinion, and you just got to understand how they work it out. But yeah, it's an art to master. I don't have the same technical chops that you do, no doubt, Jim. But man, dealing with people is dealing with people, no matter what role we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, we've covered off a little bit on your backstory. We've definitely talked a little bit about how to work with people. Let's talk a little bit about in your current role, Jim.
Sure.
Share some of the tasks that you're doing today and what you're finding to be the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges you're seeing, of late with your clients.
Oh, let's see. So obviously, I'm title-wise, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of a 24-year-old managed service provider. We're also an MSSP called JCMR. Do great work, lots of long-term clients, but the company's still fairly small. So being COO basically means you get to do everything from tracking the back office finances and sometimes putting the head of HR hat on, and other times jumping in and having much more fun conversations, doing virtual CIO capabilities, fractional CIO, doing strategy work and trying to put the whole pieces of the puzzle together. So it really, I guess it runs the gamut. For me, it's I'd say I've been probably a year and 3 or 4 months now in with JCMR, and the biggest thing that I've had to learn, really taking a step back from much larger organizations, was and I don't mean the JCMR set, I'm working with clients, trying to figure out, okay, what's the most value I can provide without proposing a solution that's so far beyond where they can afford to get to, or any other things. I mean, smaller companies operate based on cash flow. Big companies have whatever, $50 million transformation initiatives they can set aside on the balance sheet, and they can just do a write-off and whatever. It doesn't matter if it's a complete failure 2 years from now. Small company doesn't have that. So you really have to think about, how can I help them get better? How can I help them achieve their business goals? At the same time, I don't get them out over their ski tips so that they're not so extended that something bad happens and they're and they're going to the bank trying to figure out how they can afford to make payroll next week. Because I've been there with a couple of my startups. That's an unpleasant experience.
Nope, those are the fun moments, the gut check moments. But we can have a separate sidebar conversation on that, Jim. I think we both might have some now reflected funny stories on that one.
I mean, so life's about learning, and
it definitely is. Look, I think every listener on here that is an MSP owner knows that gut check moment, the realities of cash flow, and that customer who thinks you're the bank. That's always the biggest problem,
Yeah, well, that would be the other thing about those big companies that are like, oh no, I think we're going to do 90-day payment terms.
90 days.
I might be late.
90 days. I'd be fighting 180 days down to 120 sometimes, and we're not talking small numbers, listener. We're talking about, consulting teams that you're bringing in there to the tune of a payroll of $120,000 a month. And they want you to bankroll it for 6 months.
Until it's delivered, so it's longer than that.
Yep. And then when you go to the bank and go, look, I need a bridge loan on this, they're like, but you don't have 620,000 in the bank right now. We want to see dollar for dollar before we lend it to you.
Then you go to the loan sharks and you start selling receivables, and there goes your profit margin.
Oh, totally. But there's we could do a whole other half hour on the joys of that. But I think I think most MSPs can certainly understand the fact that cash flow can be a challenge. Sometimes the customers do think we're the bank, and those are things that we have to work through. And conversely, we have to think of our customers in the same manner. I always say when folks are building out their first budget, when they're working with me on VCIO Toolbox, within our Ramp Camp accelerators, you always see all the projects jammed up in the first quarter when they bring the first draft of the roadmap to you. And I'm like, my first question is, has your customer ever spent that much in a quarter with you? Have they even spent that much in a year with you before? You got to take that into consideration. And then the fine art becomes spreading it out, putting priority to it, and kind of, stretching it out as required to meet both budgetary and technology requirements. Yes, stretch your customer, but you got to stretch it within reality.
And that particular conversation is a two-way street as well, because even if the client had the money, or it could be part of the scope of work that's defined for whatever bucket of hours you have with that client, do you have the resources to have 7 projects at one client going on at the same time? The answer is probably not.
Bing, bing, bing. It's as if we've had that conversation now, but it's so true, because I'm like, okay, that's a lot of great work there. Could you deliver that at the same time? I mean, one of my favorite conversations I had with a customer once upon a time was, they were like, yeah, we did our first QBR and this customer gave us $100,000 worth of business. But the best part was we had to tell them stop. We're like, that's all we can deliver this quarter. I know you want to do the rest. I promise we'll get there. But it was amazing to get to that point in the conversation, and I was like, that's awesome.
It's an exceptionally well done job then.
But telling them to stop is really what's awesome.
But that's also in our, like, let's make sure we can do this. You don't want too much change in your environment at the same time. But
and also, you don't want to bite off more than you can deliver, because that's going to leave a bad taste with your customer too, right?
We both know that's true, but sometimes you don't want to tell a client that.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Jim, we're getting near the end of our time together, and I certainly want to leave some room for any closing thoughts that you might have.
Oh, let's see. I had a couple of thoughts, just and we've covered some of these formative events throughout the discussion here. But there's a couple of big things that I find technologists in particular often fall prey to, and these were sort of things that I picked up at various points in my career. And one of the earliest things that I learned was, if you're irreplaceable, you're unpromotable, which is a really important concept for people to get their head around. Now, that may not matter as much in a smaller organization, but if you're a junior engineer and you want to learn how to do things and you want to keep progressing in your career, don't make yourself irreplaceable. Be a teacher. Teach other people how to do things. I promise you, there's always something else to learn. You figure it out, teach somebody else, go learn something new, repeat process, career progresses. So that's a big, big, big one there. I think the other one, I'm toying with how best to talk about this one. As technologists, it's hard not to be enamored by the technology sometimes. Don't fall victim to the marketing hype.
Yeah.
Think about it. Put your brain on it. Keep your eyes open. Don't get so narrow that you're only doing this. And put it in current context here. Remember 6-8 months ago, and all the rage was, oh my God, there aren't enough people who can be hired as prompt engineers for AI. That job's already become irrelevant because AIs have gotten smarter. That's less than a year. So keep your eyes open. Yes, whatever you're doing might be really cool technology. I promise you, as a guy who's seen this happen again, something will replace it. It will.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? The cycles are getting shorter. Keep your eyes on, what am I accomplishing? What am I delivering of value to the client? How you do it? It's like driving a different car.
Yeah, I mean, look, at my listeners have heard me tell these stories plenty of times here on the podcast. I made most of my money in the early 2000s through 2010 selling Exchange servers and managing them, right? And then that technology died, and we all thought we were going to go broke when Office 365 came out. How are we going to make margins at 50 cents a box, right? And we evolved. I was the front end of the regional data center circuit too. And would I build a regional data center now? Oh God, no. Azure and AWS have taken foothold. So to your point, these things were key for a moment, but they do pass, right? And a prompt engineer is probably a great example of how quickly they can pass, because users, especially with a technology like AI, users became interested enough to learn how to write better prompts. And certainly the AIs got smarter. And that, as a result of that, we're able to interpret things better, right? And start rationalizing a little bit more. So lo and behold, there's another job that bites the dust.
But there's another job thing. Changes.
There's another jar that comes there, right?
That's just that's the way technology in particular has always worked. As long as you continue to learn, there's always going to be opportunity if you're willing.
And I think technologists, if you're out there, keep a third of your life understanding how to secure the things you're working on, because security will never go out of style.
I get that's always part of that cycle.
One constant is security will never go out of style.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because sorry. Early in my career with IBM, I got hired to build an e-business infrastructure consulting practice, and in reflection, it was basically a .com ambulance chasing operation. XYZ large company, front page of the Wall Street Journal. I had 5 people in there tomorrow.
That's awesome.
Doing the dig it out, figure out how to make it work and secure it. So.
All right, Jim. Well, we're kind of near the end of our time for today. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your thoughts, and certainly some of your insights in how to engage with customers, with both a big and little perspective, and I think that's a great thing that we can share. Certainly big company experience doesn't always translate down to the MSP world, but certainly some of the insights and some of the learnings when it comes to people and process definitely does. So I really thank you for sharing so much about your background today. Listeners, if you want to get in touch with Jim, his LinkedIn profile will be down in the show notes, so you can get there, connect with him. Certainly, he's been a great resource in the time I've gotten to know him. And we'll put a link, of course, to JCMR as well. And know you can get this podcast anywhere that you want to download your podcast, as well as YouTube. So if you're watching over there, ring that bell, subscribe, and get notified when new episodes come online. Jim, really want to thank you for joining me today. Anything else you want to share before we close? Any final thoughts? We'll call these parting shots.
Parting shots. So, first, my thank you for inviting me to participate. And as has been the experience for me over the last 6-8 weeks that we've been working together, we always seem to go down a multitude of tangents, but it's always a fun conversation. Maybe the one thing to leave with, because we've been talking about big companies and small companies, I think one of the things that I've come into JCMR and focusing on the MSP segment with is the barriers to advanced technology that used to exist, that made it so it was only the purview of these very large organizations. Most of them don't exist anymore. So some of the fun things for me have been, okay, how do I provide this enterprise class, whatever it is, in a much smaller segment, same amount of value, but we don't have to do the ridiculous kinds of investments and things like that. So that's one of the things that's kept me energized, and I am having fun with in my new role. There is like, how do I take this downstream same level of service, but without the the 2-year implementation timeline.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a little bit eye-opening for you too when you start looking at some of the down market tools that support that going, wow, these are kind of cool and much more simple than what we were building before.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing, there's reasons for some,
Yep,
but
of course.
yeah, like there's no shortage of bloat everywhere you look.
All right, Jim. Well, really appreciate you coming on board with us today. Look forward to our future conversations offline as well. And I want to thank you for being a part of this.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
You bet.